15,000 American soldiers, many unarmed, starving, and without winter gear, were ordered to hold Bastogne against 5 German divisions. They were not heroes. Their commander had already decided for them. This quiet refusal defined the battle. The popular memory of Bastogne has a critical flaw. It claims SS Panzer divisions encircled the town. The truth is different. The forces investing Bastogne in December 1944 were regular Wehrmacht units. These included the Panzer Division, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, and elements of the 2nd Panzer Division. The SS was fighting 60 miles north, battering itself against American infantry divisions. History compressed 2 distinct struggles. The regular German army, convinced of its tactical superiority, was the one that hit an unexpected wall at Bastogne. Its generals would soon discover a new kind of enemy. Earlier that winter, in bunkers across central Germany, Adolf Hitler drew a new plan. It was audacious. Operation Watch on the Rhine called for a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest. This was the same route Germany used in 1940. The goal: cut through American lines, drive to Antwerp, and split the Allied armies. Hitler believed this might force Western allies to negotiate. 3 German armies assembled in absolute secrecy. Radio silence was enforced. Troops moved only at night. Aircraft engine noise masked the sound of tanks. By December 16th, over 200,000 German soldiers waited undetected in the snow. The northern attack arm belonged to Sepp Dietrich, the general who would later testify at Dachau. The southern arm protected the flank. The crucial middle went to Hasso von Manteuffel. He was a slight, wiry man. Manteuffel stood barely 5.5 feet tall. He was 47. He came from old Prussian military aristocracy. He spoke French and English. He read philosophy. Most officers under him considered him Germany's most intelligent armored commander. Manteuffel commanded the 5th Panzer Army. His mission was simple: break the American line, race across Belgium, and seize a small road junction. That junction was Bastogne. Bastogne itself was not impressive. It was a modest market town. 4,000 inhabitants lived there before the war. It sat in a shallow valley. The town had stone buildings and narrow streets, but Bastogne lay at the intersection of 7 roads. In the Ardennes, with steep terrain and dense forests, these roads were critical. They were the only practical way to move armored vehicles west at speed. Whoever held Bastogne controlled the road network. Manteuffel understood this with absolute clarity. His plan was to hit fast and take the town. He believed he had 4 or 5 days before American reinforcements arrived. He, like Dietrich and Hitler, thought the American units in the sector would not hold. The 28th Infantry Division had been mauled. The 99th and 106th were inexperienced. The line was thin. The Germans were correct in their assessment. On December 16th, the German artillery barrage opened. It was so intense American soldiers thought the world was ending. Shells fell in darkness. Forward positions had no warning. Communications collapsed. Within hours, entire battalions of the 106th Division were routed. The 28th was breaking apart. The line opened. Manteuffel's panzers rolled west. The road to Bastogne cleared ahead of him. The German High Command, believing American resolve would fracture, anticipated rapid progress. They were about to be very wrong. 120 miles southwest, in Mourmelin-le-Grand, 15,000 American soldiers tried to sleep. They belonged to the 101st Airborne Division. They had returned from Holland 2 weeks earlier. They had fought 72 consecutive days in Operation Market Garden. The operation failed. The 101st had held ground that ground forces should have. They bled on Hell's Highway. They returned to France undersupplied and exhausted. They needed everything: uniforms, boots, ammunition, medical supplies. Above all, they needed rest. Their division commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was not with them. He was in Washington, D.C., attending a conference. He had left his division in safe billets. He expected no combat before the new year. When the German offensive began, Taylor could not return. Command fell to his deputy, Anthony Clement McAuliffe. McAuliffe was 46. He was an artillery officer. He had attended West Point. He helped develop American airborne doctrine. but he had never commanded an infantry division in sustained combat. His specialty was guns, not foxholes. He was tall, quiet, economical with words. On December 17th, McAuliffe received the life-defining order. The 101st Airborne would deploy immediately to Bastogne, Belgium. They would assist in halting a German offensive. Its scale and direction were still unclear. They would move by truck. They would leave that night. McAuliffe asked how long they had to prepare. He was told 18 hours. What followed was one of the war's strangest deployments. The division had no winter clothing. Most men wore summer field uniforms. Many had no helmets. Some had no rifles. Supply in Mormelen had been degraded by losses in Holland. Entire companies lacked basic equipment. The trucks were standard cargo trucks. They were open-backed, without canvas covers. The temperature was already below freezing. The paratroopers climbed in anyway. They drove through the night. The roads were ice. Headlights were taped down for blackout. Men sat shoulder to shoulder, breathing into their hands. Some had not eaten in 18 hours. Some had not eaten in 18 hours. Some slept upright. As they drove toward Belgium, they passed other vehicles going the other way. These were Americans, 28th Infantry, 106th Combat Engineers, artillery units. They had been overrun in the first 2 days. They were retreating. Some were wounded. Some had lost weapons. Some had lost boots. They walked alongside vehicles too full of casualties. They moved in dark columns. They had hollow faces and frostbitten fingers. They saw the paratroopers heading toward the fight. They shouted. They told them to turn around. They told them the Germans had tanks. They said the SS was coming. They claimed tigers were in the woods. What mattered was the paratroopers' next action. They climbed out of their trucks during fuel stops. They walked over to the retreating men. They did not argue. They did not lecture. They simply asked quietly, almost politely, to borrow rifles. The men of the 28th and 106th handed them over. They offered M1 Garands, ammunition bandoliers, light machine guns, grenades, bazookas, field dressings, helmets. Some apologized. Some apologized. Some said nothing. The paratroopers took the equipment. They nodded once. They climbed back into their trucks and kept driving east. Entire 101st companies arrived at Bastogne, carrying weapons borrowed just hours before. This detail is often missing from histories. It's in unit diaries. It's in after-action reports. It is in the memories of survivors. The American army in the Ardennes was not a uniform machine. It was breaking apart and being reassembled in real time. It was done in the dark, on icy roads, by men determined not to arrive empty-handed. They reached the town on December 19th. The 101st Airborne Division was not the first American unit to reach Bastogne. The previous evening another column had already entered. It was not infantry, it was armor. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division under Colonel William L. Roberts. They had been ordered north to plug any gap. They reached Bastogne late on December 18th. They positioned tank destroyers and Sherman tanks along eastern approaches. They established roadblocks. When the 101st arrived, Roberts was fighting. His tanks had engaged lead elements of the 2nd Panzer Division. His infantry support had taken casualties. His command post had operated for half a day. Hollywood later omitted this truth. The defense of Bastogne began as an armored operation. Paratroopers reinforced it. They did not begin it. But the paratroopers brought something Roberts and his tankers lacked, a psychology. The 101st Airborne had been trained to fight when surrounded. Their entire doctrine assumed they would land behind enemy lines. They expected to be cut off from supply. They would hold ground without flanks, without reinforcement, without retreat. The founder of American Airborne Forces, Major General William Lee, gave them a principle. He said, surrounded meant the enemy was now in range in all directions. It sounded like a joke initially. It was not a joke. It was an operational philosophy. The men of the 101st internalized it. They arrived at Bastogne. They saw German forces converging from 3 directions. They did not see a crisis. They saw a normal Tuesday. Roberts understood immediately. He didn't know McAuliffe. He had never served with the 101st. But he was a professional soldier. He saw paratroopers in summer uniforms climbing from cargo trucks. It was 20 degrees below freezing. He saw them carrying borrowed weapons. He saw them taking positions in the snow without complaint. He saw them moving toward the sound of guns, not away. By December 19th, the perimeter around Bastogne began to form. It would stretch 16 miles. Inside, by day's end, were 18,000 American soldiers. The 101st Airborne, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored. Stragglers, engineers, medics, cooks, truck drivers all handed rifles. Outside, closing in hourly, were 5 German divisions. The fog rolled in on the night of the 19th. It did not lift for days. Air support was impossible. Resupply was impossible. Evacuation of the wounded was impossible. The men inside the perimeter did not yet know. The only general who could relieve them, George S. Patton, was hundreds of miles away. He was in Luxembourg. Eisenhower would soon ask him to do the impossible. Turn an entire army 90 degrees in winter, attack north. For now, on December 19th, the men at Bastogne began to dig. The ground was frozen solid. Entrenching tools bounced off it. They dug anyway. 100 meters east, Mantoffel watched reports. He was beginning to feel something new. He felt his timetable had slipped. They dug through the night of December 19th and into the 20th. They used entrenching tools first. When those failed, they used bayonets. When bayonets bent, they used their hands. They scraped at the iron-hard ground. Fingers bled, blood froze. They took turns. One man dug, another stood watch. A third slept curled, helmet over his face. The temperature on December 20th was 22 degrees below freezing. This frozen resolve would face the German military machine. On the morning of the 20th, the village of Neuville fell. Team des Abris had held it. This battalion-sized element came from the 10th Armored, reinforced by 1st Battalion, 500 and 540 Wigent. They held a forward position northeast of Bastogne for 36 hours. They faced the Tuckend Panzer Division. Major William des Abris was gravely wounded by shell fragments. He was evacuated by ambulance. The ambulance never reached Bastogne. It was intercepted. Des Abris, unconscious, became a prisoner of war. He would survive. He would not learn what happened to his men until April 1945. The survivors of Team des Abris fell back into the main perimeter. They brought their wounded. They brought what equipment they could carry. They brought an understanding of what was coming. The Germans had tanks, not just Panzer Mark versus Panthers. 45 tons of steel with sloped frontal armor. American bazookas could not reliably penetrate it. The infantry behind the tanks were not exhausted Volksgrenadiers. They were trained, equipped, motivated Wehrmacht men. They executed a plan they believed could still win the war. On December 21st, the encirclement closed. The last open road into Bastogne, running south, was cut. Elements of the German 5th Parachute Division sealed it. The 101st Airborne and everyone with them was now alone. They could not be reached by ground. Air resupply remained impossible. The fog had not lifted. Wounded inside the perimeter began to die. The 326th Airborne Medical Company had been overrun on December 19th. Germans captured 11 physicians, including the division surgeon. Most surgical supplies were lost. 100 wounded men who couldn't be moved were left behind. Major Jack Pryor, a country doctor before the war, was the senior medical officer remaining. He set up an aid station in a warehouse. He had almost no morphine, no plasma, no surgical instruments beyond his personal kit. He operated by candlelight on stacked crates. Renée Lemaire, a 29-year-old Belgian nurse, volunteered. She would die 3 days later. On December 22nd, 2 German officers walked toward American lines under a white flag. Major Leo Wagner was a senior staff officer. Lieutenant Helmut Henke spoke fluent English. They carried a leather case. They were met by an American sergeant. Henke stated their purpose. "We are parlementaires. We bring a message for your commander." They were blindfolded. They were led back through American lines. The leather case was opened before Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe. Inside was a typed document. 2 pages, informal German and informal English. The English translation read, "To the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne, the fortune of war is changing. There is only one possibility to save the encircled USA. Troops from total annihilation. That is the honorable surrender of the encircled town. A term of 2 hours will be granted. If this proposal is rejected, 1 German artillery corps and 6 heavy anti-aircraft battalions are ready to annihilate the USA troops. The order for firing will be given immediately after this 2-hour term. All serious civilian losses caused by this artillery fire would not correspond with the well-known American humanity." The German commander, McAuliffe, read the document. His staff watched silently. He sat in the basement of the Heinz barracks. A single bulb lit the room. A map hung on the wall. A small stove burned wood. The temperature was 40 degrees. McAuliffe finished reading. He let the paper fall. He said one word. "Nuts." His staff thought he hadn't understood. Operations Officer Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard broke the silence. "Sir, what do you want to put in the reply?" McAuliffe looked up. "I don't know what to tell them," Kennard replied. "That first remark of yours would be hard to beat." McAuliffe nodded. The formal American reply was typed on a single sheet. McAuliffe dictated it. Colonel Joseph Harper, commander of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, carried it back. The German parliamentaires waited blindfolded. The reply read, "To the German commander, nuts. The American commander, nuts. The American commander." Harper handed it to Lieutenant Henke. Henke read it. He read it again. He looked at the American colonel with genuine confusion. He asked what the word meant. Harper considered his answer. He said, "It means the same as go to hell." He removed their blindfolds. He walked them back to the perimeter. At the line he turned. He said, "On your way, bud, and good luck to you." It was a strange courtesy. The reply was delivered to General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commander of the XLVI Panzer Corps. Luttwitz didn't understand the word either. Henke explained it. Luttwitz's reaction was not recorded. But the German artillery did not fire at the end of the 2-hour deadline. The ultimatum had been a bluff. The men inside Bastogne did not know that. They only knew their commander had told the Germans to go to hell. With the perimeter shrinking, the wounded dying, the temperature dropping, the reply spread through the division in hours. It moved by word of mouth. A runner told a sergeant. A sergeant told a squad. By nightfall on December 22nd, every man knew General McAuliffe had said, "Nuts." This was not bravado. This was not propaganda. This was the moment they understood. They were not going to surrender. Their commander had decided for them. The decision was no. They returned to their foxholes. They kept digging. On December 22nd, Heinz Kokott, commander of the 22nd Volksgrenadier Division, wrote in his command log, "The Americans inside the perimeter were fighting with unexpected determination." Kokott was 44. He had commanded troops in Russia. He had seen desperate men. He was not prone to romantic descriptions. What he saw unfold was, in his assessment, something he had not been trained to defeat. He had assumed, like Luttwitz, like Manteuffel, like Hitler, that American troops in a closed pocket would quickly degrade. The cold would weaken them. Hunger would weaken them. Isolation would weaken them. They would surrender within a week. By December 23rd, 6 days into the battle, they had not weakened. They had not surrendered. The perimeter had not shrunk. American positions had become more organized, more interlocking, more difficult to assault. German artillery fired on coordinates that were now irrelevant. Americans had moved positions overnight. Slowly, methodically, in the dark. This was not improvisation. This was not luck. This was professional infantry doctrine executed under extreme conditions. They had been trained to dig in, hold ground, and fight from cover. They were doing exactly that. On the morning of December 23rd, the fog lifted. The sky cleared. The United States Army Air Forces arrived overhead. First came C-47 transports. They took off from England before dawn. They crossed Belgium at low altitude in clear winter light. Pathfinders had jumped at first light. They marked drop zones with colored panels and homing beacons. The transports came in waves. They dropped 144 tons of supplies, ammunition, medical supplies, rations, batteries, fuel. Men inside the perimeter watched the sky open. Some described it as a religious feeling. Parachutes were colored, white for medical, red for ammunition, blue for food, orange for radio equipment. They drifted down onto frozen fields. Men of the 101st ran from their foxholes to gather them. That afternoon, P-47 Thunderbolts came over. These were close-air support fighters. Each carried 8 machine guns. They could carry 500-pound bombs. They strafed German artillery positions. They bombed German Ardennes. They flew so low men in foxholes saw the pilots. They came again and again, sortie after sortie. German attacks slowed, but they did not stop. German command knew what clear weather meant. The window for taking Bastogne by direct assault was closing. Americans were resupplied. The American Third Army was moving. Patton in Luxembourg had wheeled his entire force 90 degrees in less than 72 hours. Military historians call it a logistical maneuver of the 20th century. He was driving north with 3 divisions. He was coming for Bastogne. If Bastogne was to fall, it had to fall soon. German command decided on a final all-out assault. It would happen on Christmas Day. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division would lead. It was reinforced by elements of the 15th Panzergrenadier Division. The objective, crack the western face of the perimeter, drive into town, seize the road junction. The attack began at 3 a.m. on December 25th. It struck a village called Champs. The 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel Steve A. Chapwes, defended it. Germans came across open snow. They wore white assault suits. Tanks followed, 18 Mark Verses and assault guns, the last German armor for the Western Front. Fighting at Champs was hand-to-hand within an hour. Paratroopers fought in the streets with rifles, grenades, bayonets. Artillery support was impossible. The men of the 502nd held house by house. The temperature continued to fall. Then something happened the Germans hadn't planned for. A column of their tanks, 18 vehicles, broke the American line west of Champs. They continued east in the dark. Tank commanders believed they were heading for central Bastogne. They were wrong. Disorientation from fighting in snow, in darkness, against an enemy whose positions didn't match German maps, made the column veer south. The tanks rolled through woods not on their maps. They emerged into open ground. They expected to find the rear of American infantry. Instead, they found the divisional artillery park of the 101st Airborne. They had driven directly into the gun line of the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion. The men of the 463rd were artillerymen. They fired indirect fire missions. They were not infantry. They were not trained to fight tanks at close range. But they were paratroopers. And they had been told for 5 days there was nowhere to retreat. German tanks rolled out of the woods. In the grey light of Christmas morning, the gun crews did the only thing left. They dropped the muzzles of their 75mm pack howitzers. They pointed them horizontally. They loaded high explosive shells. They fired directly into the German tanks at point-blank range. The first volley destroyed 3 Mark V's. The second destroyed 2 more. Within 20 minutes, 7 German tanks burned in the field. Surviving vehicles tried to turn. They couldn't maneuver in soft ground. They were destroyed. Infantry following the tanks were cut down by machine gun fire. Cooks, drivers, and signalmen, pulled from the rear, formed a hasty defense line. The Christmas Day assault on Bastogne collapsed before noon. The smoke cleared. Snow fell again over bodies and burning tank hulks. The Germans had lost their best opportunity. In a farmhouse, Heinz Kokott wrote a report to General von Leutwitz. The attack had failed. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division suffered catastrophic losses. Further operations against the western perimeter were impractical. He set down his pen. He sat in the cold kitchen. He looked at the window where snow began again. He did not write what he was thinking. He would not write it until years later. On the afternoon of December 26th, a Sherman tank rolled into Bastogne's southern outskirts. It belonged to Company C. 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, U.S. 3rd Army. The tank commander was Lieutenant Charles Boggis. He was 23. He had been awake for 48 hours. The battalion was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, a stocky, cigar-chewing officer. Abrams would one day become Army Chief of Staff and have a tank named after him. Boggis's tank crossed a rise. He saw figures in the snow. He couldn't tell if they were German or American. He ordered his gunner to hold fire. He stood in the turret. He waved. A figure waved back. It was an engineer of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion, 101st Airborne Division. The siege of Bastogne was over. 8 days of combat. 6 days, fully encircled. What happened next has been described many times. There were no celebrations, no Hollywood embrace. The men of the 101st, emerging from foxholes, were too tired and cold. They nodded. Some shook hands. Some stared. A few asked for cigarettes. The tankers gave them. Paratroopers lit them with shaking hands. Major General Maxwell Taylor flew back from Washington. He reached the perimeter that evening. He resumed command from McAuliffe. McAuliffe, who spent 8 days leading a surrounded division against 5 German divisions in the worst winter in memory, did not complain. He returned to his pack howitzers. Most accounts of Bastogne end here. The siege broken. The 101st relieved. Patton arrived. The battle won. But the men inside the perimeter did not go home. They stayed. The worst was still ahead. In a bunker far to the east, Adolf Hitler received news of the breakthrough. He did not accept it. He believed the Ardennes offensive could still be saved. He gave new orders. Orders that startled his own commanders. He ordered the 1st SS Panzer Division pulled from the wreckage of the northern shoulder. It was moved south. This division was the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, Hitler's personal bodyguard. Its officers wore his monogram. It had been ground down. It was wounded. But it was still the Leibstandarte. Brigade Führer Wilhelm Muncke, 33, commanded it. Brigade Führer Wilhelm Muncke, 33, commanded it. A hard-faced man, he rose through the SS from its earliest days. He had been investigated for murdering British prisoners. He received his new orders in late December. His division would move south. It would link with elements of the 167th Volksgrenadier Division. It would attack the eastern flank of the Bastogne corridor. The objective, cut the road Patton had opened. The attack began on January 1, 1945. It struck Le Trebois, 3 miles southeast of Bastogne. It fell primarily on the 35th Infantry Division and 4th Armored Division. But eastern positions of the 101st Airborne came under heavy pressure. For the first time, men of the 101st engaged Waffen SS soldiers directly. Fighting at Le Trebois lasted 4 days. The 1st SSS Panzer Division broke there. It lost over 30 tanks. It lost officers it could not replace. It lost the cohesion that defined it for 5 years. The Leibstandarte, Hitler's personal unit, fought its last serious offensive action in the snow outside a Belgian village. It stopped. Around the same time, Hasso von Manteuffel composed a report. He sent it directly to Hitler. The report recommended immediate withdrawal of all armoured forces from the Ardennes salient. The offensive had failed. Continued attacks would only feed men and equipment into a meat grinder. Hitler rejected it. Attacks continued, smaller, more desperate. Manteuffel later described that period in his memoirs. It was the moment he understood the war was lost. Not declining, but decided. He continued to issue orders. He was a soldier. His men deserved leadership, even when leaders no longer believed. It was a grief no military manual prepares an officer for. The 101st Airborne Division remained at Bastogne through December. Into January. They took casualties. Men lost to frostbite, to trench foot, to the small violences of a battle no one else watched anymore. On January 17th, they were withdrawn. The division suffered 1,641 casualties. A smaller number than legend, but large enough. The men who walked out were changed, not better soldiers. They were excellent soldiers already. They were men tested at the absolute limit. They had not failed. German officers later wrote about it. Sepp Dickrit, at the Dachau tribunal, said 6 words. "We did not take Bastogne." Hasso von Manteuffel, interviewed after the war, called Bastogne a fishbone. It was lodged in the throat of the German advance. His army could not swallow it. They could not cough it out. The bone was still there when he withdrew. Heinz Kockott, in a post-war manuscript, finally wrote what he couldn't on Christmas Day. He assumed American soldiers in a closed pocket would degrade quickly. That assumption was incorrect. The 101st Airborne fought with cohesion and discipline. He had not been trained to defeat it. He did not call them heroes. He called them paratroopers. 80 years have passed. The men who held Bastogne are nearly all gone. The last veterans are in their late 90s. Most have laid down their rifles. They rest beside those who did not come home. In Luxembourg City Cemetery, over 5,000 Americans are buried. Among them, General George S. Patton. He asked to be buried with his men. Grass over those graves stays green. A small staff of Belgian and Luxembourgish caretakers tend the stones. Children and grandchildren of those liberated. They know why. Bastogne was not a miracle. It was a decision, made by 15,000 individual American men, alone in foxholes, in the cold, wounded, dying, enemy closing. They would not leave. They would not surrender. The Germans had a doctrine for soldiers who broke. They had no doctrine for soldiers who would not.